The fluorescent lights of Meridian Corporate Solutions buzzed with their familiar hum as Sarah Mitchell adjusted her blazer sleeve for the third time that morning. At 28, she carried herself with a precision that most people mistook for rigidity, her movements calculated and deliberate in ways that made her colleagues uncomfortable. They didn't understand the discipline behind her posture, the reasoning behind her measured responses, or the weight of experience that informed every decision she made in the sterile conference rooms of downtown Phoenix. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah had been working as a project coordinator for 18 months now, a position that felt simultaneously beneath her capabilities and impossibly challenging given the resistance she faced daily. Her transition from military service to civilian corporate life had been anything but smooth. The skills that had once made her invaluable in high-stakes intelligence operations now seemed to create friction in an environment where small talk mattered more than strategic thinking and where her direct communication style was often perceived as abrasive rather than efficient. The morning briefing was about to begin in Conference Room B, a sterile space with glass walls that offered no privacy and furniture that seemed designed more for appearances than comfort. Sarah gathered her meticulously organized files, each document precisely aligned and color-coded, according to a system that made perfect sense to her but appeared obsessive to others. Her colleagues often mocked what they called her military precision, not understanding that organization wasn't just habit for her, it was survival instinct, refined through years of operations where a misplaced detail could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Marcus Webb, the marketing director, was already holding court near the coffee station, regaling a small group with another story about his weekend golf adventures. His laughter boomed across the office space, drawing attention to himself in the way that seemed as natural to him as breathing. At 42, Marcus had climbed the corporate ladder through charm and connections rather than competence, a fact that became increasingly apparent to Sarah with each passing week. His dismissive attitude toward her suggestions had become a predictable pattern, one that she endured with the same stoic patience she had once applied to far more dangerous situations. "Oh look, here comes Sergeant Sarah with her color-coded battle plans," Marcus announced as she approached, his voice carrying just enough humor to make his mockery seem playful to observers. The group around him chuckled dutifully, their laughter a mixture of genuine amusement and social obligation. Sarah had learned to recognize the difference, just as she had once learned to distinguish between genuine intelligence reports and carefully crafted misinformation. The project they were discussing involved coordinating a multi-state logistics operation for a major client, something that required the kind of strategic thinking and attention to detail that Sarah excelled at. She had spent the weekend analyzing supply chain vulnerabilities, identifying potential bottlenecks, and developing contingency plans for various scenarios that could disrupt the timeline. Her recommendations were thorough, practical, and demonstrated a level of strategic foresight that should have impressed her colleagues. Instead, they seemed to view her preparedness as somehow excessive, her thoroughness as a sign that she was trying too hard to prove herself. Jennifer Torres from HR had joined the pre-meeting gathering, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her tablet as she scrolled through emails. Jennifer embodied everything that Sarah found bewildering about corporate culture: the emphasis on perception over substance, the careful management of appearances, the way important decisions seemed to emerge from hallway conversations rather than formal analysis. At 35, Jennifer had mastered the art of corporate navigation, speaking in euphemisms and managing relationships with the same precision that Sarah had once applied to intelligence gathering operations. "I'm sure Sarah has prepared another one of her comprehensive presentations," Jennifer said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She always comes so prepared. It's admirable, really." The subtext was clear to everyone present. Sarah's preparation was seen as compensating for some perceived inadequacy, rather than demonstrating professional competence. The comment stung precisely because it was delivered with the veneer of compliment, making any response seem defensive or ungracious. David Chen, the operations manager, glanced up from his phone long enough to add his own observation. "Yeah, she's definitely thorough. Sometimes I wonder if she thinks we're planning a military campaign instead of a delivery schedule." His comment drew more chuckles from the group, reinforcing the perception that Sarah's approach was somehow inappropriate for their civilian workplace. David had always struck Sarah as someone who preferred problems to resolve themselves, rather than taking proactive measures to prevent them, a luxury she had never been afforded in her previous career. The conference room began filling with the usual suspects, team leaders, department heads, and various managers whose exact responsibilities remained mysteriously vague to Sarah despite her months of trying to understand the organizational structure. She took her customary seat near the back corner, a position that offered her clear sight lines to all entrances and exits, another habit that her colleagues found peculiar, but that felt necessary to her sense of security and situational awareness. Regional Director Patricia Kellerman entered with her usual air of harried importance, juggling multiple phones and looking as though she had already attended 6 meetings before 9 a.m. Patricia had built her reputation on managing crisis situations, though Sarah had observed that many of these crises could have been prevented with better advanced planning. At 51, Patricia had survived multiple corporate restructures through adaptability and political acumen, skills that Sarah was still struggling to develop in this unfamiliar environment. "All right, people, let's dive into the Harrison Industries contract," Patricia announced, setting the tone for what Sarah knew would be another exercise in reactive problem-solving rather than strategic planning. The Harrison Industries project was their largest account, a complex logistics operation involving multiple distribution centers across 7 states. Sarah had identified several potential vulnerabilities in their current approach, issues that could cascade into significant problems if not addressed proactively. As Patricia outlined the current status, Sarah could see the gaps in their strategy, the places where insufficient intelligence gathering had left them vulnerable to disruption. She had prepared detailed recommendations for addressing these weaknesses, complete with alternative scenarios and contingency protocols. Her analysis drew from methodologies she had perfected during intelligence operations, adapted for civilian logistics, but maintaining the same rigorous attention to detail and strategic foresight. When Patricia opened the floor for input, Sarah raised her hand with the same crisp precision that had once signaled her readiness to brief commanding officers on classified operations. "I've identified several potential vulnerabilities in our current logistics chain," she began, her voice carrying the clear, measured cadence that had served her well in military briefings. "Based on my analysis of traffic patterns, weather forecasts, and historical disruption data, I recommend implementing backup protocols for the Denver and Atlanta hubs." The room fell into the familiar uncomfortable silence that seemed to follow most of Sarah's contributions. Her colleagues exchanged glances that she had learned to interpret as a mixture of bewilderment and condescension. Marcus leaned back in his chair with an expression that suggested he was watching a performance rather than listening to a professional recommendation. Sarah, Marcus said, with the tone one might use to address an overenthusiastic child. "This isn't D-Day. We're talking about delivering office supplies, not planning an invasion. Maybe we should focus on the actual problem instead of preparing for World War III." His comment triggered a wave of laughter that rippled through the conference room, transforming Sarah's strategic analysis into entertainment for her colleagues. Jennifer Torres smiled sympathetically while somehow managing to appear disapproving. At the same time, "Sarah does bring a unique perspective," she said diplomatically. "Though I think we need to consider whether our approach might be a bit intense for what our clients actually need. Sometimes simpler solutions are more effective. The implication was clear. Sarah's military background made her incapable of understanding civilian business needs. Her expertise a liability rather than an asset. David Chun nodded in agreement, adding his own assessment of Sarah's contribution. I mean, we appreciate the thoroughness, but our clients aren't looking for military-grade logistics. They want reliability and cost-effectiveness. All this contingency planning might be overkill for what's essentially a straightforward delivery operation. His dismissal of her recommendations revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of how small vulnerabilities could compound into major failures, something Sarah had witnessed repeatedly in both military and civilian contexts. Patricia. Kellerman glanced at her watch with the expression of someone managing multiple competing priorities. Let's table the contingency discussion for now and focus on immediate implementation issues, she decided, effectively dismissing Sarah's analysis without serious consideration. We need to hit our deadlines, and extensive planning isn't going to help us if we're behind schedule from the start. Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her chest. That came from watching preventable problems being ignored in favor of expedient solutions. She had learned to recognize this pattern during her months in the corporate world. The preference for reactive measures over proactive planning, the discomfort with comprehensive analysis, the assumption that military experience was somehow irrelevant to civilian challenges. Her colleagues seemed to view her background as a curiosity at best, a handicap at worst. The meeting continued with discussions of budget allocations, timeline adjustments, and personnel assignments that proceeded without reference to the strategic considerations Sarah had raised. She watched her colleagues navigate these decisions with the casual confidence of people who had never experienced the consequences of inadequate preparation, never seen how quickly manageable situations could spiral into catastrophic failures when proper protocols weren't followed. As the meeting wound down, Sarah gathered her files with the same methodical precision she had maintained throughout the discussion. Her recommendations would be filed away, her analysis dismissed as excessive, her expertise marginalized once again. She had grown accustomed to this pattern, though it never stopped feeling like a waste of resources and missed opportunities for improvement. Walking back to her cubicle, Sarah overheard Marcus regaling another group with his impression of her presentation. Did you see her face when I mentioned D-Day? She looked like I had insulted her entire family tree. These military types take everything so seriously. It's just business, not a matter of national security. His laughter followed her down the hallway, a reminder of how her colleagues viewed her background as something amusing rather than valuable. The afternoon stretched ahead with its familiar rhythm of emails, phone calls, and administrative tasks that utilized perhaps 10% of her actual capabilities. Sarah had learned to find satisfaction in small victories, problems prevented through careful monitoring, crises averted through advanced preparation, efficiency improvements that saved time and resources even when they went unrecognized by her supervisors. Her cubicle was organized with the same precision that characterized everything else in her professional life. Reference materials were arranged by frequency of use, contact information was updated regularly, and backup plans existed for every major process she managed. Her colleagues often commented on her organizational system, usually with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment that suggested they found her methods impressive but excessive. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sleeve of her blazer had shifted during the meeting, revealing a small portion of the tattoo on her forearm that she kept carefully concealed beneath professional attire. The design was subtle, meaningful, only to those who understood its significance, invisible to colleagues who saw only what they expected to see. She adjusted the fabric automatically, a gesture that had become second nature after months of maintaining her carefully constructed professional persona. Sarah's background remained her most closely guarded secret, not from shame but from hard-earned wisdom about how such information would be received in her current environment. She had learned that revealing her military experience led to assumptions and stereotypes that made her job more difficult rather than easier. Better to let her colleagues underestimate her capabilities than to provide them with additional reasons to dismiss her contributions or question her judgment. The weight of her unexpressed expertise pressed against her daily, creating a tension between who she had been and who she was expected to be in this sterile corporate environment. Every dismissed recommendation, every mocked suggestion, every patronizing comment from colleagues who had never faced real consequences for their decisions added to the accumulating burden of professional frustration and personal isolation that had become her constant companion. As the workday drew to a close, Sarah reflected on the growing disconnect between her capabilities and her current role, between the critical thinking skills she had developed through years of high-stakes operations and the surface-level analysis that seemed to satisfy her corporate colleagues. She had traded purpose and respect for stability and safety, a bargain that felt increasingly hollow with each passing day of underutilization and misunderstanding. The evening commute through Phoenix traffic gave her time to process the day's interactions, to analyze the social dynamics that continued to baffle her despite months of observation and adaptation. Her military training had prepared her for hostile environments, complex logistics, and life-or-death decision-making, but no amount of intelligence training had equipped her for the subtle cruelties and casual dismissals of corporate culture. Tomorrow would bring another day of the same challenges, another opportunity to prove herself to colleagues who seemed determined to view her through the lens of their preconceptions rather than the evidence of her competence. Sarah had faced far more dangerous opposition with greater equanimity, but somehow the daily erosion of professional respect felt more exhausting than the acute stresses of military service had ever been. The Harrison Industries crisis erupted on a Tuesday morning when their main distribution hub in Dallas experienced what the local news described as unexpected flooding due to infrastructure failure. Sarah had been monitoring weather patterns and municipal reports for weeks, noting the aging water main system and increased rainfall projections that made such an event not just possible but probable. Her contingency recommendations, dismissed 3 weeks earlier as excessive military paranoia, suddenly seemed prophetic rather than paranoid. Patricia Kellerman's voice crackled through the office intercom at 7:43 a.m., summoning the entire logistics team to an emergency meeting. The panic in her tone was unmistakable, the kind of barely controlled anxiety that Sarah recognized from military operations when poor planning met unexpected reality. She gathered her files methodically, including the backup protocols she had developed despite their official rejection, knowing that preparation would matter more in the next few hours than it had in months of routine operations. The emergency conference room buzzed with frantic energy as team members arrived clutching coffee cups and hastily printed emails. Marcus Webb burst through the door looking disheveled, his usual polished confidence replaced by the wide-eyed expression of someone confronting consequences beyond his control. His golf weekend stories seemed irrelevant now that actual crisis management required skills he had never bothered to develop beyond theoretical knowledge gleaned from business school case studies. The entire Dallas facility is underwater, Patricia announced without preamble, her usual diplomatic language abandoned in favor of brutal honesty. 60,000 units of inventory damaged, delivery schedules completely disrupted, and Harrison Industries threatening to terminate their contract unless we can guarantee full restoration of service within 72 hours. The room fell silent as the magnitude of the situation settled over colleagues who had spent months treating logistics as a predictable, controllable process. Jennifer Torres frantically scrolled through her tablet, searching for crisis management protocols that existed only in theoretical frameworks rather than practical implementation guides. Her usual composure cracked under pressure that demanded action rather than careful relationship management. Do we have backup facilities available? Alternative suppliers? Any contingency measures in place? She asked, her voice carrying the hopeful tone of someone seeking solutions that should have been prepared months earlier. David Chun stared at his laptop screen with the expression of someone discovering that reactive problem-solving had severe limitations when faced with genuine emergencies. His preference for letting problems resolve themselves offered no guidance when the problem threatened their largest client relationship and potentially their employment security. I'm trying to contact backup suppliers, but everyone I'm reaching says they need at least 2 weeks to handle this volume, he reported, his voice betraying the helplessness of someone unprepared for real crisis management. Sarah remained silent. During the initial panic, observing the group dynamics with the analytical detachment she had learned during intelligence operations, her colleagues were experiencing the disorientation that came from discovering that their casual approach to planning had real consequences, that their dismissal of strategic thinking had left them vulnerable to precisely the kind of disruption she had warned them about. The irony was not lost on her, though she took no satisfaction in being proven correct under these circumstances. "Wait," Marcus said suddenly, his voice carrying a note of accusation that Sarah recognized as the beginning of scapegoating behavior. "Didn't Sarah mention something about Dallas vulnerabilities a few weeks ago? Something about water systems and flooding risks?" His question was designed to deflect responsibility rather than seek solutions, but it had the unintended effect of focusing attention on Sarah's previously dismissed recommendations. All eyes turned to her with a mixture of hope and resentment. The same colleagues who had mocked her thoroughness now desperate for the strategic thinking they had ridiculed. Sarah opened her color-coded files with deliberate calm, revealing the comprehensive contingency plans she had developed despite their official rejection. Her backup protocols included alternative suppliers, rerouting options, and emergency inventory management procedures specifically designed for disasters like the one they now faced. "I prepared contingency protocols for potential disruptions at all major hub locations," Sarah stated matter-of-factly, her voice maintaining the professional tone that her colleagues had once dismissed as overly formal. The Dallas facility was identified as high risk due to aging infrastructure, seasonal weather patterns, and single point of failure vulnerabilities in their water management system. I developed alternative supplier networks and emergency rerouting procedures that could maintain 70% of normal delivery capacity within 48 hours. The room erupted in a cacophony of questions and demands as her colleagues suddenly realized that the woman they had been mocking possessed exactly the expertise they desperately needed. Patricia Kellerman leaned forward with an intensity that transformed her from harried manager to someone recognizing salvation. "You have actual backup suppliers identified? Real alternatives that can handle this volume?" she asked, her voice betraying the hope of someone discovering unexpected resources. Marcus Webb's expression shifted from panic to something approaching anger as he realized that Sarah's dismissed recommendations could have prevented their current crisis entirely. Rather than acknowledging his error in judgment, he seemed to resent her preparedness as somehow unfair. "Why didn't you push harder for implementation if you knew this could happen?" he demanded, his tone suggesting that Sarah's failure to overcome his resistance was more problematic than his resistance itself. "My recommendations were presented and documented," Sarah replied with the measured tone she had learned to use when dealing with hostile questioning. "During intelligence debriefings, implementation decisions were made at levels above my authority." Her response was diplomatically accurate while avoiding direct confrontation, though the implied criticism of leadership judgment was clear to everyone present. Jennifer Torres attempted to smooth over the growing tension with her characteristic diplomatic language. "I think what's important now is moving forward with whatever solutions we have available," she suggested, though her tone carried an underlying note of irritation at being confronted with the consequences of decisions she had supported. "Sarah, can you walk us through your contingency procedures?" The next 2 hours transformed Sarah from office pariah to indispensable resource as her colleagues grudgingly acknowledged that her military-style planning offered their only realistic path out of the crisis. Her backup supplier network included companies in 4 different states, each vetted for capacity, reliability, and emergency response capabilities. Her rerouting protocols accounted for transportation delays, inventory management challenges, and customer communication requirements that her colleagues had never considered. David Chun found himself frantically taking notes as Sarah outlined logistical procedures that demonstrated a level of strategic thinking he had never encountered in civilian business operations. Her analysis included not just immediate solutions, but secondary and tertiary contingencies for complications that might arise during implementation. "How do you even think of all these variables?" he asked with a mixture of admiration and bewilderment. That reflected his growing understanding of his own limitations. Patricia Kellerman authorized implementation of Sarah's contingency protocols with the kind of decisive authority that had been notably absent during previous meetings when Sarah's recommendations were being dismissed. The crisis had stripped away the luxury of casual decision-making, replacing it with the urgent need for competent leadership and strategic thinking. "I want Sarah coordinating all emergency operations," she declared, effectively promoting her from marginalized contributor to crisis manager. The irony was not lost on Sarah, as she found herself leading the same colleagues who had spent months patronizing her expertise and dismissing her strategic thinking. Marcus Webb, forced to acknowledge his dependence on her crisis management skills, struggled visibly with the reversal of their professional dynamic. His usual condescending humor was replaced by grudging cooperation tinged with resentment at having his incompetence so thoroughly exposed. As Sarah began coordinating with backup suppliers and implementing emergency protocols, her colleagues observed her transformation from quiet analyst to decisive leader. Her military training became visible in ways that extended beyond organizational habits, revealing command presence and operational competence that civilian business education had never developed in any of them. The woman they had dismissed as obsessively prepared was demonstrating why such preparation mattered. When real consequences were at stake, the Emergency Operations Center that Sarah established in Conference Room B bore little resemblance to their usual business meetings. Status boards tracked supplier capacities, transportation schedules, and delivery confirmations with the precision of military command posts. Communication protocols ensured information flowed efficiently between team members, eliminating the confusion and redundancy that typically characterized their crisis responses. Jennifer Torres found herself following Sarah's communication procedures with growing respect for their effectiveness, though she struggled to reconcile this competent leader with the woman she had dismissed as socially awkward and professionally excessive. The crisis was revealing character traits and capabilities that months of casual interaction had never exposed, forcing uncomfortable reassessment of assumptions and judgments that had seemed reasonable just hours earlier. By midday, Sarah's contingency protocols had restored 40% of normal delivery capacity, with additional suppliers coming online throughout the afternoon. Her emergency customer communication procedures had prevented panic and maintained Harrison Industries' confidence in their ability to manage the crisis. The same strategic thinking that her colleagues had mocked was now saving their jobs and preserving their largest client relationship. Marcus Webb watched Sarah coordinate multiple supply chain operations with an efficiency that highlighted his own limitations as a manager and leader. His resentment grew with each successful problem resolution, each demonstration of competence that he could neither match nor understand. Rather than acknowledging her expertise, he seemed to view her success as somehow diminishing his own professional standing. The transformation in her colleagues' behavior was as dramatic as it was reluctant. The same people who had laughed at her military precision now depended on that precision to manage a crisis that threatened their employment. Their mockery had been replaced by grudging acknowledgement, though underlying tensions suggested that their respect was born of necessity, rather than genuine appreciation for her capabilities. As the afternoon wore on, Sarah's emergency protocols continued demonstrating their effectiveness, while simultaneously exposing the inadequacy of her colleagues' previous planning and decision-making. Every successful intervention highlighted months of missed opportunities and dismissed recommendations, creating a growing awareness that their casual dismissal of her expertise had been not just unfair but professionally irresponsible. The crisis was far from over, but Sarah's leadership had transformed a certain disaster into a manageable challenge. Her colleagues were learning uncomfortable lessons about competence, preparation, and the value of expertise they had failed to recognize. The woman they had patronized was proving herself indispensable, though their growing dependence on her abilities was creating new tensions that threatened to complicate whatever resolution emerged from the ongoing emergency. Patricia Kellerman observed Sarah's crisis management with the recognition that she had been systematically underutilizing her most capable employee for months. The implications extended beyond the current emergency to fundamental questions about leadership judgment and organizational effectiveness that would require serious consideration once the immediate crisis was resolved. For now, though, survival depended entirely on the woman they had been too blind to value properly. Colonel Robert Hawkins arrived at Meridian Corporate Solutions at exactly 2:47 p.m. on Thursday afternoon, his presence announced not by fanfare, but by the subtle shift in atmosphere that accompanied genuine authority entering a civilian space. At 54, he carried himself with the understated confidence of someone accustomed to commanding respect through competence rather than demanding it through position. His civilian clothes, a crisp navy suit and polished leather shoes, couldn't entirely mask the military bearing that marked him as someone who had spent decades in service to his country. That the colonel's visit had been arranged through channels that bypassed normal corporate protocols, a direct connection between Harrison Industries' board of directors and the consulting firm they had engaged to evaluate Meridian's crisis management capabilities. His reputation in military logistics and intelligence operations had made him the obvious choice to assess whether their primary contractor possessed the strategic thinking necessary to prevent future disasters and maintain the complex supply chains that modern business required. Patricia Kellerman greeted him in the lobby with the nervous energy of someone whose career depended on making a positive impression during circumstances that had already exposed significant organizational weaknesses. Her usual confidence had been shaken by the past week's events, replaced by the anxious determination of a manager who understood that her handling of the crisis would define her professional future. Colonel Hawkins, thank you for coming on such short notice. We're eager to show you how we've addressed the situation. The colonel's assessment began with a methodical review of their emergency response procedures, starting with the crisis management center that Sarah had established in conference room B. His trained eye immediately recognized the military style organization that distinguished her operational setup from typical civilian business practices. Status boards, communication protocols, and information flow procedures all bore the hallmarks of someone with actual command experience rather than theoretical crisis management training. Who designed this operational structure? Colonel Hawkins asked, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone gathering intelligence rather than making casual conversation. His question was directed at Patricia, but his eyes were already scanning the room for indicators that would reveal the true source of the organizational competence he was observing. The precision and effectiveness of the setup suggested someone with real-world experience in high-stakes operations. Patricia hesitated momentarily, recognizing that honest attribution would highlight her own failures of leadership and judgment over the past months. Sarah Mitchell, our project coordinator, took the lead on crisis response, she admitted, her tone attempting to claim credit for delegation while acknowledging Sarah's role in their survival. She developed most of the contingency protocols that we implemented during the emergency. The colonel's interest sharpened perceptibly at this information, though his expression remained professionally neutral. In his experience, civilian employees rarely possess the strategic thinking and operational competence necessary to design effective crisis management systems without prior military training. The sophistication of what he was observing suggested someone with actual command experience rather than business school theories about emergency management. Sarah entered the conference room carrying updated status reports and supplier confirmations, moving with the efficient purposefulness that had become her trademark during the crisis management phase. She wore a charcoal gray business suit that projected professional competence while maintaining the conservative appearance that had become second nature during her transition to civilian employment. Her manner was focused and decisive, reflecting someone comfortable with operational responsibility. Under pressure. Colonel Hawkins, this is Sarah Mitchell, our crisis coordinator, Patricia announced, attempting to present the introduction as a planned part of their demonstration rather than an opportunity for independent assessment. Her tone carried subtle warnings about maintaining proper corporate messaging, though she seemed unaware that military officers were typically skilled at seeing through such performance management attempts. Sarah approached with the measured stride that characterized her professional interactions, extending her hand with the firm grip and direct eye contact that had been drilled into her during years of military protocol training. "Colonel," she acknowledged with a slight nod that conveyed respect without subservience, her voice carrying the crisp articulation that marked her as someone accustomed to clear, concise communication under pressure. The colonel studied her with the analytical attention of someone trained to assess personnel capabilities quickly and accurately. Her bearing, communication style, and operational competence all suggested military background, though her current role in corporate environment seemed inconsistent with the level of strategic thinking he was observing. His years of experience in military intelligence had taught him to recognize the signs of someone operating below their actual capabilities. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm impressed by the crisis management protocols you've implemented," Colonel Hawkins stated, his voice carrying genuine professional appreciation rather than empty corporate courtesy. The strategic thinking and operational efficiency suggest considerable experience with complex logistics under pressure. Most civilian organizations struggle to achieve this level of coordinated response during emergencies. Sarah felt the familiar tension that came from receiving recognition that threatened to expose the background she had worked so carefully to conceal. Her military service remained a closely guarded secret, not from shame but from hard-learned experience about how such information affected civilian employment relationships. "Thank you, Colonel. The situation required systematic analysis and coordinated response procedures," she replied carefully, her words chosen to acknowledge his praise without revealing more than necessary. Marcus Webb arrived at the conference room with his usual tendency to insert himself into important conversations, particularly those involving recognition or credit for successful outcomes. His resentment at Sarah's prominent role during crisis management had been growing throughout the week, compounded by his awareness that his own limitations had been thoroughly exposed by recent events. "Sarah certainly went all out with the organization," he commented with forced joviality that barely concealed his discomfort with her success. The colonel's assessment continued with detailed questions about strategic planning methodologies, risk assessment procedures, and contingency development processes that revealed his own extensive background in military operations. His inquiries were sophisticated and specific, designed to evaluate not just What had been accomplished, but the thinking processes that had made such accomplishments possible under pressure. Sarah found herself responding to questions that felt familiar despite their civilian context, recognizing the analytical framework that distinguished military strategic thinking from business school theories about crisis management. The colonel's line of inquiry suggested someone who understood the difference between reactive problem-solving and proactive strategic planning, between theoretical knowledge and operational experience gained through actual high-stakes situations. Your contingency planning demonstrates remarkable foresight, Colonel Hawkins observed, reviewing the backup supplier networks and alternative routing procedures that Sarah had developed months before they were needed. This level of strategic thinking typically requires experience with genuine consequences for planning failures. Most civilian operations don't face the kind of pressure that develops such comprehensive risk assessment capabilities. The conversation was interrupted by Jennifer Torres arriving with coffee and the kind of nervous energy that characterized her interactions with important visitors. Her usual diplomatic composure was strained by awareness that the colonel's assessment could determine their company's future relationship with Harrison Industries. "Colonel, I hope everything is meeting your expectations," she said with a brightness that seemed forced under the circumstances. As the afternoon progressed, Colonel Hawkins's questions became increasingly specific and technically sophisticated, revealing his own expertise while simultaneously testing the depth of Sarah's knowledge and experience. His inquiries about intelligence gathering procedures, threat assessment methodologies, and operational security measures went far beyond typical business consulting topics, suggesting interests that extended beyond civilian crisis management. Evaluation. Sarah recognized the subtle probing techniques that characterized intelligence interviewing, though she couldn't determine whether the colonel's questions reflected general military background or specific intelligence training. Her responses remained professionally appropriate, while avoiding details that might reveal more about her background than she intended to share. The conversation felt like a careful dance between two people who understood more than they were willing to acknowledge openly. David Chun joined the discussion with status updates from supplier coordination efforts, his manner reflecting newfound respect for Sarah's operational competence, combined with bewilderment at capabilities he was still struggling to understand. "Sarah's been coordinating 12 different suppliers across 4 states, he reported to the colonel. "I've never seen anything like the level of detail in her tracking systems." The colonel nodded with the recognition of someone who understood the complexity of multi-source logistics coordination, though his expression suggested curiosity about how a civilian project coordinator had developed such sophisticated operational capabilities. His years of military service had taught him to recognize the signs of genuine expertise, and what he was observing exceeded anything that civilian business training typically produced. "Ms. Mitchell, your operational procedures suggest considerable experience with complex coordination under pressure," Colonel Hawkins commented, his tone carrying subtle encouragement for her to expand on her background. "Most civilian managers struggle with this level of detail orientation and strategic thinking. It's quite impressive." His words carried the weight of professional assessment rather than empty compliments. The late afternoon sun slanted through the conference room windows as Colonel Hawkins prepared for the final phase of his evaluation, unaware that his next question would trigger revelations that would transform everyone's understanding of the woman who had been saving their jobs, while enduring months of condescension and professional dismissal. The stage was set for discoveries that would expose truths carefully hidden and force confrontations with assumptions that had shaped months of workplace dynamics. Sarah adjusted her blazer automatically, the gesture that had become second nature whenever professional attention threatened to expose more than she intended to reveal. The sleeve shifted slightly, though not enough to reveal anything significant to casual observation. Her composure remained steady despite growing awareness that Colonel Hawkins possessed the experience and expertise to recognize signs that her civilian colleagues had been too ignorant or distracted to notice. The conversation continued with increasing intensity as the colonel's questions probed deeper into strategic thinking and operational competence, setting the stage for the moment when careful concealment would give way to inevitable revelation, when hidden expertise would finally be recognized by someone qualified to understand its true significance and value, the moment that would change. Everything began with a seemingly insignificant accident. Sarah reached across the conference table to retrieve the Harrison Industries supply chain analysis that had slipped from Colonel Hawkins's grasp. A simple gesture of professional courtesy that should have passed unnoticed among the dozens of similar interactions that occurred daily in corporate environments. The thick folder had scattered its contents across the polished surface, creating the kind of minor disruption that typically prompted apologetic chuckles and hurried reorganization. As Sarah extended her arm to gather the dispersed documents, the fabric of her carefully chosen blazer caught momentarily on the edge of the table, pulling the sleeve upward just enough to expose a small section of her forearm that had remained hidden throughout months of meticulous professional presentation. The movement lasted perhaps 3 seconds, barely long enough for casual observers to register, but sufficient to reveal something that transformed Colonel Hawkins's professional assessment into shocked recognition. There, etched in black ink against her pale skin, was a tattoo that made the colonel's breath catch in his throat with the force of unexpected discovery. The design was understated but unmistakable to anyone with the knowledge to interpret its significance. A stylized eagle perched above a shield, surrounded by symbols that meant nothing to civilian observers, but conveyed precise information about service, specialization, and sacrifice to those who understood military insignia and unit designations. The tattoo identified Sarah as belonging to the 525th Military Intelligence Brigade, an elite unit specializing in strategic analysis, counterintelligence operations, and information warfare that operated at the highest levels of military command structure. But it was the additional markings surrounding the central design that caused Colonel Hawkins to freeze in stunned recognition, small symbols that indicated not just service, but distinguished service. Not just participation, but leadership. Not just survival, but heroism under circumstances that few people could imagine or endure. Colonel Hawkins had spent 32 years in military service, 15 of those in intelligence operations that had brought him into contact with some of the most capable and dedicated professionals in the American military establishment. He recognized excellence when he encountered it, understood the difference between routine service and exceptional contribution, and knew enough about the 525th Military Intelligence Brigade to realize that the woman sitting across from him possessed credentials that exceeded anything her civilian colleagues could comprehend. The silence that followed his recognition was profound and electric, charged with implications that rippled through the conference room like shock waves from an unexpected explosion. Patricia Kellerman continued, organizing papers with the oblivious efficiency of someone unaware that the fundamental assumptions underlying their meeting had just been shattered. Marcus Webb maintained his typical posture of aggressive casualness, ignorant of the revelation that was about to expose months of his condescending behavior as not just inappropriate, but deeply offensive. "Afghanistan," Colonel Hawkins said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper, but carrying the weight of absolute certainty. The single word hung in the air like a challenge, a question, and a statement of respect, all compressed into 4 syllables that conveyed understanding that transcended normal civilian conversation. His eyes never left Sarah's face as he waited for confirmation of what he already knew to be true. Sarah's carefully constructed professional mask faltered for the first time in months, her composure cracking under the pressure of being truly seen by someone who possessed the knowledge and experience to understand what her service had actually entailed. Her instinctive response was to deny, deflect, or minimize, but something in the colonel's expression, a combination of professional respect and personal gratitude, made such evasion impossible. Kandahar Province, 2018 to 2021, she confirmed, her voice steady despite the emotional turbulence of having her most closely guarded secret exposed by someone who understood its full significance. Intelligence analysis and counterintelligence. Operations supporting forward operating bases throughout the region. The admission felt both liberating and terrifying, like removing armor that had protected her, but also constrained her. For too long, the revelation hit the room with the impact of a revelation that redefined everything her colleagues thought they knew about Sarah Mitchell. Patricia Kellerman's eyes widened as she began to understand that the woman she had been systematically underutilizing was not just qualified for greater responsibility, but possessed expertise that exceeded her own leadership capabilities. The efficient crisis management that had saved their company suddenly made perfect sense in ways that revealed her own limitations as a manager and decision-maker. Marcus Webb's expression shifted from casual superiority to something approaching horror as he realized that his months of patronizing comments and dismissive behavior had been directed at someone whose service record represented the kind of sacrifice and dedication that his civilian experience had never approached. His golf stories and marketing strategies seemed pathetically trivial in comparison to operations that had involved genuine life-and-death consequences for real people in hostile territory. The Kabul evacuation, Colonel Hawkins continued, his voice gaining strength as pieces of a puzzle fell into place with devastating clarity. You were part of the intelligence team that identified escape routes and coordinated civilian evacuations during the final weeks before withdrawal. I read the classified reports. Your unit's work saved thousands of lives during one of the most complex and dangerous operations in recent military history. Sarah nodded slowly, her professional reserve finally cracking under the weight of recognition. From someone who truly understood what those final months in Afghanistan had demanded from everyone involved. The sleepless nights analyzing threat intelligence, the constant pressure of knowing that analysis errors could result in American casualties, the moral complexity of operations that required impossible choices between competing priorities, all of it suddenly visible to someone with the experience to appreciate its significance. The Purple Heart, Colonel Hawkins observed, his trained eye identifying additional symbols in her tattoo that indicated wounds received in service to her country. IED attack during a reconnaissance mission. You continued providing intelligence. Analysis from a field hospital while recovering from shrapnel wounds that should have earned you immediate medical evacuation. His voice carried the profound respect of someone who understood that such dedication went far beyond normal duty requirements. The conference room fell into stunned silence as the full implications of Sarah's background became clear to her civilian colleagues. Jennifer Torres stared with the expression of someone discovering that she had been casually dismissing the recommendations of someone whose expertise in strategic analysis exceeded anything available in civilian business consulting. Her diplomatic skills seemed irrelevant when confronted with the reality of genuine leadership under impossible circumstances. David Shun found himself reviewing months of interactions with growing shame as he realized that his casual dismissal of Sarah's excessive preparation had been directed at someone whose survival had depended on exactly that kind of thorough analysis and contingency planning. His preference for reactive problem-solving suddenly seemed not just inadequate, but disrespectful to someone who had faced consequences that his civilian experience couldn't imagine. The Silver Star, Colonel Hawkins continued, his voice now carrying the formal tone of someone delivering an official commendation rather than casual conversation. For gallantry in action during Operation Enduring Freedom. Your intelligence analysis identified an imminent attack on forward operating Base Charlie 7, enabling defensive preparations that prevented what would have been catastrophic American casualties. His words carried the weight of official recognition that had been classified for years, but was finally being acknowledged by someone with the authority to speak truth. Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time in months, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being truly understood by someone who comprehended the weight she had been carrying alone. Her service had involved decisions that haunted her dreams, analysis that had determined who lived and who died, responsibilities that civilian life had never prepared her to process or forget. Colonel Hawkins's recognition validated not just her competence, but her sacrifice in ways that no corporate evaluation could match. "Ma'am," Colonel Hawkins said formally, rising from his chair with the crisp precision of someone offering military honors rather than civilian courtesy. "It is my privilege to recognize your service and to apologize on behalf of everyone who failed to understand the caliber of person they were working alongside." His gesture was simultaneously personal acknowledgement and official correction of months of institutional blindness and individual disrespect. The transformation in the room was immediate and dramatic, as the reality of Sarah's background restructured every assumption and relationship that had defined their workplace interactions. Marcus Webb looked physically ill as he confronted the magnitude of his disrespectful behavior toward someone whose service record represented everything he claimed to support in abstract political discussions, but had failed to recognize when confronted with its reality. Patricia Kellerman struggled to process the implications of having systematically underutilized someone whose strategic thinking and operational experience exceeded anything available through civilian hiring or consulting services. Her crisis management had been saved by expertise that she had been too ignorant to recognize or too prejudiced to value appropriately. The irony was devastating and undeniable. Jennifer Torres found herself reconsidering every diplomatic conversation and carefully managed interaction with growing awareness that her relationship management skills were trivial compared to the communication challenges that Sarah had navigated. While coordinating intelligence operations under combat conditions, her corporate training seemed embarrassingly inadequate by comparison. The silence stretched as everyone in the room grappled with revelations that demanded fundamental reassessment of assumptions, relationships, and professional judgments that had seemed reasonable just minutes earlier. Sarah's hidden expertise was finally visible, her sacrifice acknowledged, and her competence recognized by someone qualified to understand its true significance and value. "Colonel," Hawkins extended his hand toward Sarah with the formal respect reserved for genuine heroes, his gesture carrying decades of military tradition and personal gratitude for service that had protected his country and preserved American lives through dedication that exceeded normal human expectations. The moment marked not just recognition, but restoration of honor that had been denied for too long by ignorance and institutional blindness that was finally being corrected through proper acknowledgement and respect. The immediate aftermath of Colonel Hawkins's revelation created a seismic shift in the conference room's atmosphere that extended far beyond simple embarrassment or surprise. Patricia Kellerman found herself staring at Sarah with the expression of someone discovering that they had been unknowingly employing a genuine expert while treating her like an entry-level coordinator. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Months of dismissing strategic recommendations from someone whose intelligence analysis had literally saved American lives in combat zones. Marcus Webb's usual confidence had evaporated entirely, replaced by the pale complexion and wide-eyed expression of someone confronting the magnitude of his own ignorance and insensitivity. His casual mockery of Sarah's military precision now seemed not just inappropriate, but obscene, given that her precision had been developed while coordinating operations where imprecision meant death for American soldiers. His hands trembled slightly as he reached for his coffee cup, seeking something to occupy his attention while avoiding direct eye contact with the woman he had spent months patronizing. "I need to make some calls," Patricia announced abruptly, her voice carrying the strained control of someone whose worldview had just been fundamentally reorganized by information that demanded immediate action. She understood intuitively that Sarah's revelation would require comprehensive changes in organizational structure, reporting relationships, and strategic planning processes that went far beyond simple acknowledgement of past mistakes. The woman she had been underutilizing possessed capabilities that could transform their entire approach to business operations. Jennifer Torres remained frozen in her chair, her tablet forgotten as she processed the implications of having dismissed the strategic insights of someone whose analytical capabilities had been proven under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. Her diplomatic skills, which had seemed so valuable in managing corporate relationships, appeared trivial compared to the communication challenges that Sarah had navigated while coordinating intelligence operations with life-or-death consequences. For military personnel in hostile territory, Colonel Hawkins maintained his formal posture while observing the group's reactions with the analytical attention of someone trained to assess how organizations processed unexpected information. His years of military service had taught him to recognize institutional dysfunction, and what he was witnessing represented a textbook case of organizational blindness that had prevented recognition of exceptional talent. The transformation he was observing would either strengthen the company through proper utilization of Sarah's expertise or expose fundamental leadership failures that might prove impossible to correct. David Chun broke the silence first, his voice barely above a whisper as he struggled to articulate thoughts that seemed inadequate for the situation. "Sarah, I had no idea. The way we've been treating your recommendations, the dismissive comments about your preparation methods." He trailed off, recognizing that his words couldn't possibly address the scope of respect and recognition that had been denied to someone whose service record represented the highest levels of military distinction and sacrifice. Sarah remained seated with the composed dignity that had characterized her behavior throughout months of professional disrespect, though Colonel Hawkins's recognition had clearly affected her more deeply than she was willing to acknowledge publicly. Her military training had taught her to maintain operational effectiveness regardless of personal circumstances. But the validation from someone who truly understood her background carried emotional weight that threatened her carefully maintained professional composure. "The crisis management protocols you developed," David continued, his voice gaining strength as understanding replaced confusion. "They weren't just thorough business planning. They were based on actual experience with life and death logistics, coordination, the backup systems, the redundancy planning, the communication procedures. You were applying combat-tested methodologies to civilian operations." His growing awareness of her expertise made his previous dismissal of her recommendations seem not just wrong but criminally wasteful of resources and capabilities. Patricia Kellerman returned from her brief absence with the decisive energy of someone who had made fundamental decisions about organizational restructuring. During a 5-minute phone conversation with executives who understood the implications of employing someone with Sarah's background and credentials. "Sarah, I've just spoken with our board of directors," she announced, her tone carrying the formality of someone delivering official recognition rather than casual workplace communication. "Effective immediately, you're being promoted to Director of Strategic Operations with full authority over crisis management, contingency planning, and risk assessment for all major client accounts." Patricia continued, her words carrying the weight of organizational transformation rather than simple personnel adjustment. "Your salary will be adjusted to reflect your new responsibilities and, frankly, the expertise that we should have recognized months ago. This promotion comes with my personal apology for the systematic underutilization of your capabilities." The promotion represented more than career advancement. It acknowledged that Sarah's military intelligence background provided strategic thinking capabilities that exceeded anything available through civilian business education or consulting services. Her analysis of supply chain vulnerabilities, development of contingency protocols, and crisis management leadership had demonstrated competencies that justified executive-level responsibility and compensation. Marcus Webb's reaction to Sarah's promotion was a complex mixture of professional jealousy and personal shame that reflected his awareness that his own limitations had been thoroughly exposed by recent events. His marketing expertise, which had seemed so valuable during routine operations, appeared superficial compared to the strategic thinking that Sarah brought to organizational challenges. "Congratulations," he managed, though his tone carried undertones of resentment that would require careful management in future professional interactions. Jennifer Torres approached Sarah with the diplomatic grace that characterized her professional interactions, though her manner now reflected genuine respect rather than the condescending courtesy that had marked their previous relationship. "Sarah, I owe you an apology," she said formally. "My comments about your intensity and preparation methods were inappropriate and reflected my ignorance about the level of expertise you bring to our organization. I hope we can work together more effectively going forward." The apology represented acknowledgement of institutional failure rather than simple personal misunderstanding. Jennifer's diplomatic training had taught her to manage relationships and navigate corporate politics, but she had never encountered someone whose communication skills had been developed while coordinating intelligence operations under combat conditions. Sarah's directness, which had seemed socially awkward in corporate settings, actually reflected communication protocols designed for situations where clarity could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Colonel Hawkins observed these interactions with the satisfaction of someone who had witnessed justice being served after months of institutional blindness. His assessment of Meridian Corporate Solutions would now include recognition that they employed someone whose strategic capabilities exceeded most military intelligence officers, though their previous failure to recognize her expertise raised questions about organizational competence that would require ongoing evaluation. "Ms. Mitchell," Colonel Hawkins said formally, "I'll be recommending to Harrison Industries that they expand their relationship with Meridian Corporate Solutions specifically because of your strategic capabilities. Your crisis management demonstrated exactly the kind of advanced planning and operational competence that modern logistics requires. My report will emphasize that your background provides capabilities that are simply unavailable through conventional civilian hiring or consulting services." The endorsement carried implications that extended far beyond individual recognition to fundamental changes in how the company would be perceived by major clients and competitors. Sarah's military intelligence background, once revealed, became a strategic asset that differentiated Meridian from other consulting firms and justified premium pricing for services that incorporated combat-tested analytical methodologies and crisis management protocols. David Chun found himself reviewing months of meetings and planning sessions with growing appreciation for insights that he had dismissed as excessive or impractical. Sarah's recommendations about backup suppliers, alternative routing procedures, and communication protocols had all been based on operational experience that civilian business training simply couldn't provide. Her obsessive attention to detail reflected standards developed in environments where oversight could result in American casualties. The transformation extended beyond individual relationships to fundamental changes in organizational culture and operational procedures. Sarah's promotion to Director of Strategic Operations represented acknowledgement that military expertise provided capabilities that justified restructuring reporting relationships and decision-making processes. Her strategic thinking would now guide major client relationships and crisis management protocols rather than being marginalized through ignorance and institutional prejudice. Patricia Kellerman's phone rang with the distinctive tone that indicated calls from major clients who had heard preliminary reports about the personnel changes at Meridian Corporate Solutions. Harrison Industries wanted immediate confirmation that Sarah Mitchell would be personally involved in all future strategic planning, recognizing that her background provided exactly the kind of advanced analytical capabilities that modern supply chain management required. "Sarah," Patricia said after ending the call, "Harrison Industries specifically requested that you lead the development of their new 5-year logistics strategy. They understand that your background provides insights that simply aren't available through conventional business consulting. This represents our largest strategic planning contract in company history, and they want your personal involvement. Because of your military intelligence expertise, the contract opportunity represented validation of Sarah's capabilities while simultaneously exposing the magnitude of resources that had been wasted through months of organizational blindness. Her strategic thinking, once dismissed as excessive preparation, was now recognized as exactly the kind of advanced planning that major clients required for complex operations in an increasingly uncertain business environment," the afternoon concluded. With planning sessions for Sarah's transition to executive responsibilities, discussions that reflected fundamental changes in organizational structure and strategic approach rather than simple personnel adjustments. Her military intelligence background would now guide major business decisions, crisis management protocols, and client relationship strategies that recognize the value of combat-tested analytical methodologies and operational expertise. The transformation was complete. Sarah Mitchell had evolved from marginalized project coordinator to strategic executive whose military background provided capabilities that differentiated her organization from competitors and justified PREMIUM positioning in consulting markets. The recognition she had been denied for months was now accompanied by resources, authority, and respect that acknowledged her true expertise and professional value. 6 months after Colonel Hawkins's revelation transformed Sarah Mitchell from undervalued coordinator to strategic executive, the impact of her story had crystallized into permanent, institutional changes that extended far beyond individual career advancement to fundamental shifts in how American businesses approached veteran employment, strategic planning, and organizational talent recognition. The conference room where her military intelligence background had first been revealed now bore a small plaque, commemorating what corporate leadership seminars had begun calling the Mitchell moment, a term that described the instant when hidden expertise becomes visible and transforms organizational understanding. Meridian Corporate Solutions had evolved into the Southwest's premier strategic consulting firm, with Sarah's military intelligence methodologies becoming the foundation for services that commanded premium pricing from clients who understood that combat-tested analysis provided competitive advantages unavailable through conventional business consulting. Her crisis management protocols had been adopted by dozens of companies throughout Arizona and Nevada, creating standardized procedures that reflected military operational principles adapted for civilian business environments. The company's revenue had tripled during the 6 months following Sarah's promotion, with new clients specifically requesting strategic analysis from consultants with military intelligence backgrounds. Patricia Kellerman, whose leadership had been questioned following the initial crisis, had transformed her management approach to actively identify and promote employees whose expertise exceeded their current positions. Her executive development program now included mandatory training about recognizing and utilizing military experience in civilian business contexts. Marcus Webb had requested transfer to a different division within 3 months of Sarah's revelation, unable to function effectively in an environment where his previous behavior toward her remained a source of professional embarrassment and personal shame. His replacement, Captain Michael Stevens, recently retired from Army Logistics, brought military experience that complemented Sarah's intelligence background and created a leadership team that understood how to translate combat-tested strategic thinking into civilian business advantages. The Veteran Strategic Excellence Institute established with Sarah as founding director, had become the nation's premier organization for connecting military-experienced professionals with civilian employers who needed advanced strategic planning capabilities. Located in a renovated office building near downtown Phoenix, the Institute provided career transition services, executive coaching, and consulting opportunities that ensured military expertise received appropriate recognition and compensation. Sarah's keynote address at the National Business Leadership Conference had been viewed more than 2 million times online, making her the most recognizable advocate for veteran employment integration in American business. Her presentation, titled "The Strategic Advantage Hidden in Plain Sight," challenged corporate leaders to examine their own organizations for underutilized military talent while providing practical frameworks for identifying and promoting veteran expertise. Every day, thousands of American businesses struggle with strategic planning challenges while employing veterans whose military experience provides exactly the analytical capabilities they need, Sarah had told the conference audience. The question isn't whether military expertise translates to civilian success, it's whether civilian organizations are sophisticated enough to recognize and utilize the strategic advantages that veteran employees bring to competitive business environments. The Harvard Business Review published Sarah's case study as part of their special issue on hidden human capital in American organizations, with her experience serving as the primary example of how institutional blindness prevented recognition of exceptional talent. The article, co-authored with organizational psychology researchers, demonstrated that Sarah's situation represented systematic patterns rather than isolated incidents, with survey data revealing that 67% of veteran employees believed their military expertise was underutilized in civilian roles. Major consulting firms, including McKinsey, Deloitte, and Boston Consulting Group, had established veteran recruitment programs specifically designed to identify and hire former military intelligence officers, logistics specialists, and operational planners whose combat experience provided strategic thinking capabilities that civilian business education couldn't replicate. The demand for military experienced consultants had created career opportunities with compensation packages that finally matched veteran expertise with appropriate professional recognition. Sarah's personal transformation continued beyond professional success to healing that addressed the psychological challenges of military to civilian transition that affected thousands of veterans struggling to find purpose and recognition in environments that didn't understand their capabilities. Her office wall displayed letters from veterans across the country who had used her example to advocate for appropriate positions and compensation in their own civilian careers. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez, recently retired from Air Force Intelligence, had achieved promotion to Chief Strategy Officer at a Fortune 500 manufacturing company after presenting Sarah's career transition model to executives who realized they needed military strategic thinking to address complex global supply chain challenges. Sarah's story gave me the framework to articulate why my military background provided competitive advantages rather than an interesting but irrelevant experience. Maria wrote in her thank you letter. The Mitchell Foundation, established with proceeds from Sarah's consulting contracts and speaking engagements, provided scholarships for veteran spouses, pursuing business education and transition support for military families adapting to civilian employment markets. The Foundation's headquarters, located adjacent to the Veteran Strategic Excellence Institute, offered career counseling, executive coaching, and networking opportunities that connected transitioning service members with employers who understood the value of military expertise. Phoenix had become a national model for veteran-friendly business development, with the mayor's office establishing the Military Talent Initiative that connected local companies with former service members whose expertise matched their strategic planning and operational needs. The initiative's success had attracted attention from economic development organizations across the Southwest, Leading the similar programs in Denver, Austin, and San Antonio, Sarah's weekly television segment on the Phoenix Business Network, Strategic Thinking with Sarah Mitchell, provided analysis of current events through the lens of military intelligence methodologies, demonstrating how strategic analysis principles applied to civilian business challenges, political developments, and economic trends. Her ability to explain complex geopolitical situations using frameworks developed during intelligence operations had made her the region's most trusted voice on strategic analysis and risk assessment. The Sarah Mitchell Conference Room at Meridian Corporate Solutions featured a permanent display showcasing military medals, commendations, and service awards from employees throughout the company, creating visible recognition of veteran contributions that had previously remained hidden. The display served as both inspiration for military employees and education for civilian colleagues who needed to understand the expertise and sacrifice that military service represented. Her autobiography, Intelligence Under Fire, From Combat Analysis to Corporate Strategy, had spent 16 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, with foreign language editions published in 12 countries where American business practices influenced corporate development. The book's success had led to a documentary deal with Netflix, bringing her story to international audiences who needed to understand how military expertise contributed to civilian innovation and strategic thinking. Corporate leadership development programs at major business schools now included case studies based on Sarah's experience, teaching future executives about identifying and utilizing hidden talent within their organizations. Her story had become required reading in organizational behavior courses at Stanford, Wharton, and Harvard, where students learned about the costs of institutional blindness and the competitive advantages of proper talent recognition. The annual Mitchell Symposium on Military Excellence in Business attracted executives, veterans, and researchers from across North America to discuss best practices for integrating military expertise into civilian organizations. The symposium's proceedings were published as academic research that influenced corporate hiring practices, military transition programs, and government policies related to veteran employment support. Sarah's influence extended beyond business to military transition policy, with her testimony before congressional committees leading to legislation that required federal contractors to demonstrate specific efforts to identify and utilize veteran expertise in their operations. The Mitchell Amendment, as it became known, created accountability measures that prevented the kind of systematic underutilization that had characterized her early civilian employment experience. Her marriage to Colonel Hawkins, the man whose recognition had transformed her career, represented not just personal happiness, but symbolic completion of a journey from isolation to community, from dismissal to respect, from hidden potential to recognized expertise. Their wedding reception, attended by hundreds of veterans and business leaders, celebrated both personal love and professional vindication that honored military service through appropriate civilian recognition. The legacy extended to future generations through scholarship programs that supported military children pursuing careers in strategic analysis, intelligence operations, and business leadership. Sarah's experience had demonstrated that military expertise provided competitive advantages that justified investment in veteran education and career development, creating opportunities for the next generation of military families to achieve appropriate recognition for their capabilities and contributions. 10 years later, Sarah's portrait hung in the Pentagon's Hall of Distinguished Service, recognizing her post-military contributions to veteran employment integration and strategic business development. The inscription read, Captain Sarah Mitchell, Military Intelligence Corps, whose civilian success demonstrated the strategic value of military expertise and transformed veteran employment opportunities across American business. Her story had become legendary among military transition specialists, business school professors, and corporate executives who understood that recognizing hidden talent required institutional wisdom, personal courage, and organizational commitment to excellence over convenience. The woman who had once been dismissed for her precision and preparation had become the standard for how military expertise should be valued, recognized, and utilized in civilian organizations that needed strategic thinking to compete in complex global markets. The conference room where Colonel Hawkins had first recognized her tattoo remained unchanged except for the small plaque that reminded visitors that excellence often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone with the knowledge and courage to see what others miss. Sarah's legacy lived in the thousands of veterans whose careers had been transformed by her example and the organizations that had learned to recognize the strategic advantages that military experience provided to civilian success. 6 months after Colonel Hawkins's revelation transformed Sarah Mitchell from undervalued coordinator to strategic executive, the impact of her story had crystallized into permanent, institutional changes that extended far beyond individual career advancement to fundamental shifts in how American businesses approached veteran employment, strategic planning, and organizational talent recognition. The conference room where her military intelligence background had first been revealed now bore a small plaque, commemorating what corporate leadership seminars had begun calling the Mitchell Moment, a term that described the instant when hidden expertise becomes visible and transforms. Organizational understanding, Meridian Corporate Solutions, had evolved into the Southwest's premier strategic consulting firm, with Sarah's military intelligence methodologies becoming the foundation for services that commanded premium pricing from clients who understood that combat-tested analysis provided competitive advantages unavailable through conventional business consulting. Her crisis management protocols had been adopted by dozens of companies throughout Arizona and Nevada, creating standardized procedures that reflected military operational principles adapted for civilian business environments. The company's revenue had tripled during the 6 months following Sarah's promotion, with new clients specifically requesting strategic analysis from consultants with military intelligence backgrounds. Patricia Kellerman, whose leadership had been questioned following the initial crisis, had transformed her management approach to actively identify and promote employees whose expertise exceeded their current positions. Her executive development program now included mandatory training about recognizing and utilizing military experience in civilian business contexts. Marcus Webb had requested transfer to a different division within 3 months of Sarah's revelation, unable to function effectively in an environment where his previous behavior toward her remained a source of professional embarrassment and personal shame. His replacement, Captain Michael Stevens, recently retired from Army Logistics, brought military experience that complemented Sarah's intelligence background and created a leadership team that understood how to translate combat-tested strategic thinking into civilian business advantages. The Veteran Strategic Excellence Institute, established with Sarah as founding director, had become the nation's premier organization for connecting military experienced professionals with civilian employers who needed advanced strategic planning capabilities. Located in a renovated office building near downtown Phoenix, the Institute provided career transition services, executive coaching, and consulting opportunities that ensured military expertise received appropriate recognition and compensation. Sarah's keynote address at the National Business Leadership Conference had been viewed more than 2 million times online, making her the most recognizable advocate for veteran employment integration in American business. Her presentation, titled "The Strategic Advantage Hidden in Plain Sight," challenged corporate leaders to examine their own organizations for underutilized military talent, while providing practical frameworks for identifying and promoting veteran expertise. Every day, thousands of American businesses struggle with strategic planning challenges while employing veterans, whose military experience provides exactly the analytical capabilities they need, Sarah had told the conference audience. The question isn't whether military expertise translates to civilian success. It's whether civilian organizations are sophisticated enough to recognize and utilize the strategic advantages that veteran employees bring to competitive business environments. The Harvard Business Review published Sarah's case study as part of their special issue on hidden human capital in American organizations, with her experience serving as the primary example of how institutional blindness prevented recognition of exceptional talent. The article, co-authored with organizational psychology researchers, demonstrated that Sarah's situation represented systematic patterns rather than isolated incidents, with survey data revealing that 67% of veteran employees believed their military expertise was underutilized in civilian roles. Major consulting firms including McKinsey, Deloitte, and Boston Consulting Group had established veteran recruitment programs specifically designed to identify and hire former military intelligence officers, logistics specialists, and operational planners whose combat experience provided strategic thinking capabilities that civilian business education couldn't replicate. The demand for military experienced consultants had created career opportunities with compensation packages that finally matched veteran expertise with appropriate professional recognition. Sarah's personal transformation continued beyond professional success to healing that addressed the psychological challenges of military to civilian transition that affected thousands of veterans struggling to find purpose and recognition in environments that didn't understand their capabilities. Her office wall displayed letters from veterans across the country who had used her example to advocate for appropriate positions and compensation in their own civilian careers. Lieutenant Colonel Maria Rodriguez, recently retired from Air Force Intelligence, had achieved promotion to Chief Strategy Officer at a Fortune 500 manufacturing company after presenting Sarah's career transition model to executives who realized they needed military strategic thinking to address complex global supply chain challenges. Sarah's story gave me the framework to articulate why my military background provided competitive advantages rather than interesting but irrelevant experience. Maria wrote in her thank you letter, the Mitchell Foundation, established with proceeds from Sarah's consulting contracts and speaking engagements, provided scholarships for veteran spouses pursuing business education and transition, support for military families adapting to civilian employment markets. The Foundation's headquarters, located adjacent to the Veteran Strategic Excellence Institute, offered career counseling, executive coaching, and networking opportunities that connected transitioning service members with employers who understood the value of military expertise. Phoenix had become a national model for veteran-friendly business development, with the mayor's office establishing the Military Talent Initiative that connected local companies with former service members whose expertise matched their strategic planning and operational needs. The initiative's success had attracted attention from economic development organizations across the Southwest, leading to similar programs in Denver, Austin, and San Antonio. Sarah's weekly television segment on the Phoenix Business Network, Strategic Thinking with Sarah Mitchell, provided analysis of current events through the lens of military intelligence methodologies, demonstrating how strategic analysis principles applied to civilian business challenges, political developments, and economic trends. Her ability to explain complex geopolitical situations using frameworks developed during intelligence operations had made her the region's most trusted voice on strategic analysis and risk assessment. The Sarah Mitchell Conference Room at Meridian Corporate Solutions featured a permanent display showcasing military medals, commendations, and service awards from employees throughout the company, creating visible recognition of veteran contributions that had previously remained hidden. The display served as both inspiration for military employees and education for civilian colleagues who needed to understand the expertise and sacrifice that military service represented. Her autobiography, Intelligence Under Fire, From Combat Analysis to Corporate Strategy, had spent 16 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list, with foreign language editions published in 12 countries where American business practices influenced corporate development. The book's success had led to a documentary deal with Netflix, bringing her story to international audiences who needed to understand how military expertise contributed to civilian innovation and strategic thinking. Corporate leadership development. Programs at major business schools now included case studies based on Sarah's experience, teaching future executives about identifying and utilizing hidden talent within their organizations. Her story had become required reading in organizational behavior courses at Stanford, Wharton, and Harvard, where students learned about the costs of institutional blindness and the competitive advantages of proper talent recognition. The annual Mitchell Symposium on Military Excellence in Business attracted executives, veterans, and researchers from across North America to discuss best practices for integrating military expertise into civilian organizations. The symposium's proceedings were published as academic research that influenced corporate hiring practices, military transition programs, and government policies related to veteran employment support. Sarah's influence extended beyond business to military transition policy, with her testimony before congressional committees leading to legislation that required federal contractors to demonstrate specific efforts to identify and utilize veteran expertise in their operations. The Mitchell Amendment, as it became known, created accountability measures that prevented the kind of systematic underutilization that had characterized her early civilian employment experience. Her marriage to Colonel Hawkins, the man whose recognition had transformed her career, represented not just personal happiness, but symbolic completion of a journey from isolation to community, from dismissal to respect, from hidden potential to recognized expertise. Their wedding reception, attended by hundreds of veterans and business leaders, celebrated both personal love and professional vindication that honored military service through appropriate civilian recognition. The legacy extended to future generations through scholarship programs that supported military children pursuing careers in strategic analysis, intelligence operations, and business leadership. Sarah's experience had demonstrated that military expertise provided competitive advantages that justified investment in veteran education and career development, creating opportunities for the next generation of military families to achieve appropriate recognition for their capabilities and contributions. 10 years later, Sarah's portrait hung in the Pentagon's Hall of Distinguished Service, recognizing her post-military contributions to veteran employment integration and strategic business development. The inscription read, "Captain Sarah Mitchell, Military Intelligence Corps, whose civilian success demonstrated the strategic value of military expertise and transformed veteran employment opportunities across American business." Her story had become legendary among military transition specialists, business school professors, and corporate executives who understood that recognizing hidden talent required institutional wisdom, personal courage, and organizational commitment to excellence over convenience. The woman who had once been dismissed for her precision and preparation had become the standard for how military expertise should be valued, recognized, and utilized in civilian organizations that needed strategic thinking to compete in complex global markets. The conference room where Colonel Hawkins had first recognized her tattoo remained unchanged except for the small plaque that reminded visitors that excellence often hides in plain sight, waiting for someone with the knowledge and courage to see what others miss. Sarah's legacy lived in the thousands of veterans whose careers had been transformed by her example and the organizations that had learned to recognize the strategic advantages that military experience provided to civilian success. The ripple effects of Sarah's transformation continued expanding years after her initial recognition, creating waves of change that reached institutions, policies, and individual lives across the nation. The Department of Veterans Affairs established The Mitchell Protocol, a comprehensive framework for helping transitioning service members translate their military expertise into civilian career opportunities that match their actual capabilities rather than settling for positions that underutilize their strategic thinking and operational experience. Dr. Amanda Foster, Director of Veteran Services at Arizona State University, incorporated Sarah's experience into a doctoral program focused on organizational psychology and veteran integration. Her research revealed that companies employing veterans with properly recognized military expertise showed 23% higher profitability than organizations that failed to identify and utilize such capabilities. Sarah Mitchell's case study has become the gold standard for understanding how military experience translates to competitive business advantages. Dr. Foster explained during her presentation at the International Conference on Human Resource Management. The state of Arizona designated September 15th as Hidden Heroes Recognition Day, commemorating the anniversary of Sarah's revelation and encouraging organizations throughout the state to examine their own workforces for underutilized talent and unrecognized expertise. Governor Patricia Martinez, herself a Navy veteran, used the annual proclamation to highlight statistics showing that Arizona's veteran-friendly business policies had attracted over 40 Fortune 500 companies to relocate operations specifically to access military experienced talent. Sarah's influence extended internationally when the British Ministry of Defense invited her to consult on their veteran transition programs, recognizing that American innovations in military to civilian career integration provided models for improving their own services to retiring military personnel. Her recommendations led to policy changes that revolutionized how the UK approached veteran employment, creating systems that ensured military expertise received appropriate recognition and compensation in civilian careers. The Sarah Mitchell Institute for Strategic Excellence, now operating campuses in 8 states, had graduated over 3,000 veterans who achieved executive-level positions in major corporations, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. The Institute's curriculum combined traditional business education with advanced strategic thinking methodologies derived from military intelligence operations, creating hybrid programs that produced leaders uniquely qualified for complex operational challenges. Former students included General Manager Lisa Chun, who transformed Amazon's supply chain efficiency using logistics principles learned during her Army service. Chief Technology Officer James Rodriguez, whose cybersecurity expertise, developed through military intelligence operations, revolutionized financial services protection systems. And CEO Catherine Williams, whose strategic planning background from Air Force operations led a struggling manufacturing company to record profitability within 18 months. The National Security Agency recruited Sarah as a senior consultant for their Business Military Integration Task Force, recognizing that her experience bridging intelligence operations and civilian business provided unique insights for government agencies seeking to improve their own organizational effectiveness. Her recommendations influenced federal hiring practices, interagency coordination procedures, and strategic planning methodologies that enhanced national security operations through better utilization of personnel expertise. Major universities established endowed chairs in military business integration studies, with Sarah serving on selection committees that chose professors whose research advanced understanding of how combat experience translated to civilian leadership capabilities. The University of Chicago's Mitchell Chair in Strategic Studies became the most prestigious academic position in the field, attracting scholars whose work influenced corporate training programs and government policy development. Her speaking engagements had evolved from corporate consulting to international diplomacy, with invitations to address the World Economic Forum, NATO Strategic Communications Conference, and United Nations Veterans Integration Summit. Her presentation on military expertise as competitive advantage in global markets influenced economic development policies in 12 countries, leading to international cooperation agreements that facilitated veteran employment across national boundaries. The documentary Hidden in Plain Sight, The Sarah Mitchell Story, won Academy Awards for Best Documentary Feature and Best Original Score, bringing her experience to global audiences who needed to understand how systematic talent underutilization affected economic competitiveness and individual human dignity. The film's success led to a television series development deal that would dramatize similar stories of hidden expertise and organizational transformation. Corporate training programs based on Sarah's experience had been implemented by over 200 companies, creating standardized procedures for identifying and promoting employees whose backgrounds exceeded their current positions. The training materials developed through the Mitchell Institute provided practical frameworks for managers who needed to recognize military expertise without relying on crisis situations to expose organizational blindness. Sarah's mentorship network included over 5,000 veterans whose careers had been directly influenced by her guidance, creating a professional community that supported military to civilian transitions while maintaining connections to military values and strategic thinking approaches. Monthly virtual meetings connected veterans across industries and geographical locations, sharing experiences and opportunities that accelerated career advancement for military experienced professionals. The Mitchell Doctrine, adopted by the Department of Defense as official policy, required all military transition programs to include specific training about advocating for appropriate civilian positions and compensation that reflected actual capabilities rather than accepting underemployment due to institutional prejudice or systemic misunderstanding of military expertise value. Her influence on corporate governance extended through board positions with 7 major companies, where her strategic analysis and risk assessment capabilities guided decision-making processes that required the kind of systematic thinking and contingency planning that military intelligence operations had refined through decades of high-stakes applications. Her presence on corporate boards provided competitive advantages that justified premium stock valuations and attracted investors who understood the strategic value of military experienced leadership. The Sarah Mitchell Fellowship Program, funded through partnerships between major corporations and veteran organizations, provided financial support and career mentoring for military spouses and children pursuing careers in strategic analysis, business leadership, and organizational development. Fellowship recipients achieved success rates that exceeded traditional business education programs, demonstrating the continued influence of military values and strategic thinking approaches across generations. International consulting assignments took Sarah to 43 countries, where her expertise in organizational transformation and strategic planning helped governments, corporations, and nonprofit organizations improve their operational effectiveness while better utilizing their human resources. Her work with the European Union's Veteran Integration Initiative influenced policy changes that affected employment opportunities for military personnel throughout member nations. The annual Mitchell Awards, recognizing organizations that demonstrated exceptional commitment to identifying and promoting veteran expertise, had become the most prestigious recognition in corporate human resources management. Recipients included companies whose veteran-friendly policies created competitive advantages that influenced industry standards and investor decisions about organizational effectiveness and long-term growth potential. Sarah's research contributions included peer-reviewed articles in Harvard Business Review, Strategic Management Journal, and Military Psychology, establishing academic foundations for understanding how military experience translated to civilian business advantages. Her scholarship influenced curriculum development at major business schools and provided theoretical frameworks for organizational behavior research that advanced understanding of talent, recognition and utilization. The Mitchell Center for Strategic Studies at George Washington University became the nation's premier research institution for military-civilian integration studies, conducting research that influenced government policy, corporate training programs, and academic understanding of how combat experience created strategic thinking capabilities that benefited civilian organizations facing complex operational challenges. Her autobiography's continued success, with sales exceeding 2 million copies in 17 languages, had established her as the authoritative voice on veteran employment integration and organizational talent recognition. Speaking fees from her book tour had funded scholarship programs that supported over 800 military children pursuing higher education in fields related to strategic analysis and business leadership. The permanent exhibition, Military Excellence in Civilian Leadership at the Smithsonian Institution, featured Sarah's story as the centerpiece of displays that educated visitors about the contributions that military experience made to American business innovation and economic competitiveness. The exhibition attracted over 1 million visitors annually, influencing public understanding of veteran capabilities and encouraging support for military-friendly employment policies. Her marriage to Colonel Hawkins had produced 2 children, Sarah Elizabeth and Robert Michael, who grew up understanding that their parents' love story represented broader themes about recognition, respect, and the importance of seeing people's true capabilities rather than surface appearances. Their family foundation provided educational opportunities for military children, while supporting research into veteran employment integration and organizational development. The conference room plaque that commemorated the Mitchell moment had been replicated in corporate offices, military transition centers, and academic institutions throughout North America, serving as a reminder that excellence often remained hidden until someone possessed the knowledge and courage to recognize it. Each plaque carried the inscription, "Excellence waits in plain sight for those with wisdom to see and courage to act." 25 years after Colonel Hawkins first recognized her military intelligence tattoo, Sarah Mitchell had become synonymous with organizational transformation, veteran advocacy, and strategic excellence that bridged military service and civilian achievement. Her legacy lived not only in policy changes and institutional reforms, but in the thousands of individual lives that had been transformed by her example and the recognition that military expertise provided competitive advantages that justified investment, respect, and appropriate compensation. The woman who had once been dismissed for her precision and strategic thinking had become the standard by which organizations measured their commitment to recognizing and utilizing exceptional talent, regardless of its source or previous manifestation. Her story continued inspiring leaders, veterans, and organizations that understood that true excellence required not just individual capability, but institutional wisdom to recognize and develop the strategic advantages that hidden expertise provided to competitive success. The ultimate measure of Sarah's impact was not her personal achievements, but the systematic changes that ensured future veterans would receive recognition and opportunities that matched their capabilities from the beginning of their civilian careers, rather than waiting for crisis situations to reveal the strategic value that military experience brought to organizational excellence and competitive advantage in increasingly complex business environments. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.